Post-awakening sadhana. Thank you very much, Cheryl. Thank you for reminding me. Post-awakening sadhana. I was saying you can have an awakening on different domains, wasn't I? You can have the awakening on the domain of time, where you realize that time maybe is an illusion. You can have an awakening like that, where the past and the future just seem non-existent, and all there is the eternal now. That's one kind of awakening experience. And then many types. Another type is when you sense that there's no one here anymore. There's an awakening to no person. Or maybe a shift in identity. Maybe now you have a sense that you are at one with everything. So the sense of who you are has changed. You see, there's a domain of awakening on the level of being of your identity. And then there's another domain which of an awakening. You can have an awakening on the level of geographical space, where the sense of near and far and here and there are just seen to be illusory, or just appearances in consciousness, but not necessarily real. Just like on a cartoon, you're watching a cartoon and it looks like their characters moving all over the place, but actually it's all just an illusion. There is no actual real three-dimensional space in a cartoon. It just appears that way. So you can have these awakenings to different degrees and different domains, and they can liberate you to varying amounts, meaning that you're still in ignorance, but you're less ignorant now. And what does that mean? That means you're suffering less. You're suffering less on some level. But you're still suffering. And as long as the suffering is there, you need to continue a sadhana, a spiritual practice. At least that's the recommendation. And that's how it will be for most people. If I ever say you need or you must, this applies to the majority. There will probably be exceptions. And what is the basic post-awakening sadhana? Well, there are a couple, but they have the similar thing in common. One thing in common they have is letting go. Letting go, often called renunciation. And you let phenomena arise and you let them fall. Sometimes this is called surrender. Sometimes it's called being the witness. Sometimes it's called going with the flow. Sometimes it's called karma yoga. There are all these different words. And then another aspect is to search for who you are. And this in turn has two aspects to it. One is turning within, so focusing your attention within. And when we say within, you see, most people, when they're focusing their attention within, they're still actually extroverted. Their attention is actually extroverted, because as long as your attention is on the body, the mind, or the world, then you're extroverted. And the mind, especially, the mind, it includes all feelings and sensations and thoughts and imaginations and psychic experiences, all experiences, all phenomena. As long as you're being caught up in any phenomena, your mind is extroverted. And the extroverted mind is called the ego, or the me, or the jiva, or the mind. And when the mind is no longer extroverted, you could say it's introverted, it's no longer focusing on the body, mind, and world, then you can say it's called the self, or silence. This is the introversion. And this is the self-inquiry, the quest for who you are. You gently and lovingly focus your attention onto who you are, what you are, and you explore that. And there's a question, who am I, or what am I? That can arise. So there's an aspect where we're seeing through the form of the ego, the structure of the ego. We're looking, who am I? What am I? We're looking, what is this ego? What is its structure? What does it look like? How does it feel? What is it made up of? What is its structure? There's an investigation. And you see there's no ego there. There's no one there. There's no entity there. We call that the insight part of the teaching. You're having an insight. You're realizing something about your identity. You're having an insight that the me that you thought you were doesn't exist. So now the structure of the ego has been dismantled. You thought that ego would look a certain way and you assumed that was you. And now you look into who am I and you can't find any I. And so you've seen through the structure of the ego. The structural aspect of the ego has been dissolved. That itself is an awakening. It's not liberation. Why not? Well, for most people it is not. Why? Because of the vastness. The vastness are these habitual tendencies to recreate the ego, for the ego to resurrect itself again and again and again. This identification as being a body-mind entity resurrecting itself again and again and again. The ego perpetuating itself out of habit. These are the vasanas, the habitual egoic tendencies. And we can call this the functional aspect of the ego, or the functional aspect of ignorance. So even when you've seen through the structure once or twice or 3 times, it keeps on coming back. And this tendency to keep on bouncing back, keep on coming back, we call it the vasanas in Sanskrit. And because of the vasanas, we need to practice. Otherwise, it just keeps on coming back and keeps on causing suffering. Again, we can go to the drug addict metaphor again. If being ignorant and being egoic is the same as being addicted to a drug, the drug called ego. If you're a compulsive drug addict and you need to take drugs every day, and you stop taking drugs for one day and you're happy, and you realize on that one day you don't need drugs to be happy. You can be happy without drugs. That's like an awakening. That's like an epiphany. You realize, I don't need this drug, this substance to be happy. I'm happy. I've had an experience of being happy without it. Now, is that full realization, full liberation? No, it's not. Because a day or two later, you might, because of the force of habit, because the addiction is so strong, you might find yourself back taking drugs again. You might find yourself back identifying as the ego again. So then you've had an awakening, you've had a realization that you don't need the ego, that the ego isn't what it seems. It doesn't actually exist fundamentally. But the belief in it and the actual day-to-day expression of it continues on and off, on and off. So you need a post-awakening sadhana practice, a method to root out the vasanas. This is why all the scriptures, the Vedanta scriptures, the Buddhist scriptures, they say, using different terminologies, that you need to root out the vasanas. Shankara said that liberation is when the vasanas have been extinct. And Ramana says the same thing. Ramana Maharishi says the same thing. All these traditional teachings, these true traditional teachings, the genuine traditional teachings, they say the same thing. It's not enough just to see there's no one here for most people. Unless your addictive tendencies are very, very slight, very, very minimal. So you can say there are 2 aspects of ignorance. There's the structural aspect of ignorance, which is this belief that there's a me. And there's the functional aspect, which is the habitual tendency to believe in a me. And the insight teachings address the structural aspect. They break down the idea that there's someone here. And then the purification part of the teaching, the sadhana, the practice, addresses the habitual tendency. So this is why there are two aspects of the teaching. It's because there are two aspects of ignorance. You can go after just one. So you can go just for an insight teaching or just for a purification teaching. And that can work, but for most people it doesn't work as well.